Trump touts ending Roe as his accomplishment and honor. It is yoked to him now, even though, remember, for most of his adult life, he proclaimed himself very pro-choice. In fact, I'm going to show you when he was in his 50s compared to now.
I'm very pro-choice. I am pro-choice in every respect. I was able to terminate Roe v. Wade. I was so honored to have done it.
That's a major change. And there's a question of beliefs here. And I'm going to walk you through this. On the same issue over time, President Biden has also changed.
I do not view abortion as a choice and a right.
I support Roe. I support a woman's right to choose under that constitutional guaranteed provision. The Supreme Court's terrible, extreme, and I think so totally wrong-headed decision to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Now, Biden's position changed. And as president, he took actions to protect women's rights, the DOJ even taking some basically red states to court over it. So what really matters here? Is it a president's personal beliefs, if they have them? Or is it what they do, who they appoint? Or is it some combination of these two themes? This matters for the choice people are going to be making in these 20 days plus. Biden's a lifelong practicing Catholic, and that once shaped his policy stances more back in the 70s, a very different time for women's rights. And you could see him there in the pews. Back then, he said he didn't like Roe. It went too far. I don't think a woman has the sole right to say what should happen to her body, he said in 1974. Now, Biden says he still has a religious view personally on the topic, but as president of this whole country, he thinks the Supreme Court precedent should have been upheld. And just last year, he put it plainly. He didn't walk away from the complexity, but he said, I'm a practicing Catholic. I'm not big on abortion. But guess what? Roe v. Wade got it right. So Biden says, and many allies and friends of his around him say it's true and provable over the decades, that he has this nuanced difference between his own religious upbringing and his obligations as a leader. And in a country where there are many religions, many spiritual views, there is not a way to have one religion rule public policy for all. Our Constitution also counsels otherwise. And Biden's not the first in this category. Other candidates have emphasized on the campaign trail that their religion would not dictate every decision in office. So there's some nuance. And yet many voters have a common shorthand, I bet you've heard it, about focusing on choosing candidates whose personal beliefs supposedly should match their own. People can seek this belief alignment, but the power brokers and insiders who often run things, they don't do that. They use a very different lens. And this is what I want to talk to you about. Many of them don't care what the politicians personally believe, or whether they go to church, or what they personally decide is right and wrong in some religious ethical sense. Some of them don't even care what the politicians say. A lot of the most powerful people making political moves that affect your life only look at what the politicians do in office and whether they can predict or shape it. So take the same issue of abortion. One of the most effective political operations in the U.S. is the multi-decade right-wing anti-abortion or pro-life movement, which set out to change the courts so they could change the law. And as we all know, and as a backlash might judge, depending on what happens in November, that effort to change the courts and the law was achieved. They did it. And they didn't care much about Trump's proclaimed or past beliefs.
I'm very pro-choice. I am pro-choice in every respect.
They knew about that, but they focused on not that, which may still be true, but whether they could get Trump to appoint pro-life judges if he won. When it comes to beliefs, these groups didn't use their money and power to get some big study going of what Trump or anyone personally believed. They used their power to get their values imposed on you, imposed on the public, not to search the candidates' hearts. The leader of that abortion effort is Leonard Leo. He's a conservative power broker. He leads a big group that does this work and chairs the Federalist Society. He's been involved in every Republican Supreme Court pick in this modern era. And he's deployed accumulated incredible wealth from other like-minded donors, topping $500 million. And ProPublica notes he's the man behind the right Supreme Court supermajority. Now, Leo often moves behind the scenes, but I did ask him about this in an interview a few years ago at Cornell Law School and learned about a specific example with Trump, which is echoing now today with abortion being the voters' top concerns. All the way back in 2016, Leo talked to candidate Trump. And in an example of how power works, Trump then released a list of judges he would pick from that list to decide who would go on the Supreme Court. In other words, the power brokers didn't want to know his heart or his past views. They wanted a specific list they could hold him accountable to if he would provide it. Sometimes that happens in private and they talk it out. In this case, Trump wanted to do it in public. And Leo helped write the list.
It was Donald Trump, the candidate, Don McGahn, his general counsel, and myself. At some point, he sprung this idea about the list. I want to put out a list of all people from which I would pick a Supreme Court justice.
You handed him a list of how many names?
At that meeting, it was a list of 8. And he said, well, I really wanted a dozen.
That's how it actually worked. They literally handed him the list of judges. Anyone could see Vance is not consistent. If you searched his beliefs, at best you'd find a changing contradiction, or maybe, technically, you'd find nothing. But before most people heard about him, Thiel already knew about that whiplash tour from never Trump to always Trump.
I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him.
The most important thing that we can do for those people, for that American nation that we all love, is to re-elect Donald J. Trump, President of the United States.
No consistent beliefs. For Vance backers, it may show that he can be shaped into anything, reversing the core story he used to rise to prominence. This contrast is at the heart of the race right now, where power brokers may see a bonus in Vance being so malleable. So at one level, you can say, yeah, politicians do shift their positions. That happens. And then voters may care depending on the reason. At another level, not all these changes are substantively the same. Changing based on society's evolving progress, like candidates in both parties have actually done around marriage equality, or in response to some new set of facts or new conditions, that's different than changing just to pursue power. So you can decide whether you want to focus heavily on, say, somebody's past personal beliefs, or also factor in that lens that the insiders are using. Is there a way to hold the politicians accountable to what they will do? Not be fooled by talk about beliefs if they're not relevant to what's going to be done with their power. Now, I could stop right there. But there is a final layer that's also specific to our current MAGA era, and is also bad news for this Trump-Vance experiment. And let me say it as plainly as possible. Donald Trump has ushered in a lying, cynical style that has now become the dominant rhetoric and mode of the Republican Party. And November will be an election that tests whether that continues or is finally brushed back. But his team admits they oppose facts, truth, and efforts to find truth. How else can you explain the incriminating howls of complaint by Trump and Vance when any factual sources fact-check them? Which is the whole point of having factual institutions like science or journalism. This goes beyond the usual debates that candidates can spin, exaggerate, or change their views, which predates this era, of course. It actually goes to a point from the book on, well, BS is how I can say it on air, by the philosopher Harry Frankfurt, where he discusses BS and how BS artists are worse for civic society than liars, he argues. Because the liar still operates as if the truth exists and it matters, and then operates against it for some goal. But the BS artist doesn't even care and would destroy it all for whatever the reasons are for them, usually personal gain, for politicians' power. The philosopher writes, someone who lies and someone who tells the truth are playing on opposite sides in the same game. One, guided by the authority of the truth, the liar, defies that authority. But the BSer, as he says, the BS artist, ignores these demands altogether. He does not reject the authority of the truth, as the liar does, and oppose himself to it. He pays no attention to it at all. And Frankfurter argues, by virtue of this, the BSer is a greater enemy of the truth than lies are. It's kind of deep, but if you know anyone who BSes a lot, you can probably identify the difference between that and a specific falsehood or lie. If it sounds politically familiar, it's one reason that Trump's endless parade of misinformation, now parroted by Vance, is so grating and concerning. And perhaps you feel that when you see, is this how we live now? Vance won't admit Trump lost the last election. It's come up in many high-profile venues. But note, he doesn't actually lie to claim Trump won. He's just BSing through every question about it over and over. The truth can be complicated. In our report tonight, the examples include policy shifts in both parties over time for different reasons. We touched on different ideas about how to wield power. You can decide which might be relevant to you or what you think. But committing to live in a society governed by truth is not complicated. It's actually something very old school. It's the bedrock of reason, science, a shared reality, and any attempt at a democracy governed by that reality rather than political, self-interested propaganda. Sadly, but importantly, the choice between that kind of BS propaganda and people who will leave at the end of the day and still finding the truth is a choice on the ballot this year.